All right, today I'm going to talk about whether grading really increases the value of a card. There's a lot of commentary and a lot of questions and a lot of opinions about if grading is a scam and if it increases the card value and should I do it or not. I'll talk about what grading actually does. Then I'm going to give some examples. I'm going to show you three different kinds of examples where the grading influences the card's value. I'll talk about the formula for thinking about value, and then finally leave you with some takeaways or things to consider. So what does grading do? Right? And I think about it really in four ways. The first is it authenticates the card. It tells me, is this a legitimate card, and so on, which sounds silly, but for classic rookie cards, for vintage cards, there are a lot of fakes out there. And the first thing it does is authenticate that this is a legitimate card, because real serious collectors do care about that, right? You don't want to have the fake Michael Jordan in your collection for 20 years and then realize that it's not worth the cardboard it's printed on. The second thing is it does a condition assessment. And most grading companies have sort of a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being what's considered gem mint or perfect. And 1 is a card that's crimpled up in your pocket, thrown in the washing machine, and sort of, lots of creases and looks horrible. But ideally, it's a standard assessment where sort of a 5 is a 5, and everybody knows that. Now, I will say there's a lot of feedback on if there really is consistency of grading, and people will show all the time, hey, I sent in this card, it came back as a 2, I broke it open, I resent it, it came back as a 6. But let's go with conceptually, it's an assessment of the condition. The third thing that grading does is it protects the cards. They come back in nice slabs that are sealed. People will put them in clear plastic cases or slips or things like that. So for additional protection, but the slabs provide nice protection, especially if you want to handle the cards and you like looking at them like I do. I really like the sort of the feel of the slabs, so you can still see the card and enjoy it without worrying about damaging it further. And then finally, it does do a resale boost, and I'm going to show you with three examples where it actually does increase the value of the cards based on recent eBay sales. So let's take the first example. Let's go vintage, 1968 Mickey Mantle, a classic card. And the way to think about this is ungraded or raw is what the card would just go for if you found it at a show or on eBay or something like that. And you can see on the bottom, there's big variances, right? One went for $67, one went for $312, all within the last month. And there are variances. A lot of that probably has to do with the look of the card. But as you can see on the top, in the middle section there, even a 7 graded card of this is a 7-time increase in value. And as you go up to 10, look at that, it's $234,000. So that's, 18, 17x increase in value. And so for vintage cards, I will say even really low grades, just because they've been around for so long and they really weren't protected as much as they were as people really started understanding this as a hobby. But even low grade cards go for really good amounts of money, which is why most people will tell you vintage cards are really good for sending off for grading. The second example is maybe a recent rookie. So I actually have 2 of these Paul Skeens cards, and you can see raw goes for anywhere from $1 to $3 to $4. I did buy a few of them at a show for $1, but you can see here with the raw cards, a 9 goes for $20 and an 8 goes for $10. And when you talk about the fees of grading, which in most PSAs are north of $20, $22, $25. From a value perspective, it isn't worth it unless you get a 10. So in this example, the 10 is a 66. So that would be worth it, but you really have to consider what is a 10. And a lot of times you think cards come back and they're not. So for example, the 2 Paul Skeens I sent off of these are both worth $9. We're both graded as a 9. So in this scenario, it actually wasn't worth the value of it. Now, I plan on putting it away for consideration for later, so I wasn't really worried about the value, but certainly something to think about. Then let's go to junk wax era. Barry Bonds, I think he had 7 MVPs, batting titles, things like that. And even though these cards are almost 40 years old, you can see one went for a penny at the bottom there, and 99 cents. And so they were just so mass produced in the 1980s that they're just not worth a lot. And you can see here, anything up to 10 is worth less than the grading fees. Now a 10 at $500 would certainly be worth it. But again, a lot of what sort of the average person will look at, it's hard to tell that something's a 10. And I will say there's so many examples that I see online where people think something's is a 10 and it comes back as a 6 or a 7. And so, you're taking a gamble, but you could see with the junk wax, because so many were produced, unless it's a 10, it's probably not worth it. So let's talk about the formula for grading, and let's talk about costs first. And I really see it in sort of three categories of cost. The first is what the card cost. Whether you bought it at a show or on eBay or you opened a pack, there was an initial outlay of cost. I will say for my collection, since they're 30, 40 years old, I think about that as zero because it was a sunk cost that I got when I was a kid. But there is the initial cost. The big piece is the grading cost, and there are fees to grade it, but also be aware that there's shipping fees, and if the card is worth more than a certain amount, I think it's $500 for PSA, they also charge an insurance amount, which is a percentage. So you really have to understand what the grading costs are. And then don't forget there's other costs to think about. So, storage, if you have a box or you put them in top loaders or anything like that, they're not super expensive, but that is a cost to consider, as well as eBay fees. If you're selling it, eBay takes a certain fee, or you're shipping them out, you have stamps and postage and things like that. So you really have to consider all of the costs, and you take that from the value, and it's the market value of the card. And here's where some people like to speculate, right? When you have the vintage cards, you don't have to worry about it as much because those generally tend to go up in value. But if last year you thought Anthony Volpe was going to be, the next Derek Jeter, which a lot of people were saying, and he has a 200 batting average year, maybe your Anthony Volpe rookie is worth less this year than it was last year because the market's changed. Or, in 2014, you looked at this prospect named Aaron Judge and you made some gambles, and now those are paying off. So the market does fluctuate. So you have to think about the market value, and those things together really are the profit. So let me leave you with a couple of parting thoughts. The first is, I believe grading absolutely can increase value. And you saw with some of those examples, it was a 20x or 30x increase in value. There's also a belief, and I think the metrics prove this also, that certain companies have higher values as well. So I sort of send all mine through PSA, and when you look at it, PSA does generally have a higher resale value. But the answer is yes, grading can increase the value. But I would say do a realistic assessment of quality. And if you think something's going to be a 10 just because you opened it from a fresh pack and you didn't really inspect it the way that the grading companies inspect it, I think you're going to be severely disappointed. And I have another video that goes into all of the aspects that are looked at with grading. The third is consider all those costs, whether it's the additional fees and whether it's the shipping costs or so on. You really have to think about all of the costs associated with it. And then the fourth is, look, or you just enjoy the hobby. A lot of the cards I send away because I want to have them slabbed and because I want to have them in my collection and I like looking at them. I have every Nolan Ryan Topps base card from 1969 to 1994 graded, and I'm sure a lot of the more recent ones aren't worth the grading cost. I just enjoy having them and having them all slabbed. So those are some thoughts. Let me know your comments, your thoughts. What did I miss? What are other things to think about? Is grading a scam? It might be, but definitely let me know. And thanks for watching.